Hello, everyone. Stellar, Draper, BRICS, and Nexus. Why am I providing you this particular update? And more importantly, why does it all really matter? You know, some people pointed out there's things that we just don't know that's behind the scenes, but we can dive more into the key concepts and see how it all plays out with what's available. So consider sticking around to the end of the outline if you choose to do so. I really appreciate it. If not, there are chapters. Smash that like if you haven't done so already. And let's get into the material because guess what? Once again, multiple mentions of Draper with Stellar, but this time it's them, as in Danelle Dixon and the Stellar Development Foundation and so on, sharing the stage. Yeah, that's right, with Draper University. So check this out. Thought it was really interesting. Shout out to Rue Black and the Underdog Research Channel. If you want to learn more about Draper connections, definitely follow these two gentlemen. They do a fantastic job when it comes to deep dive research. So look at this. This is really something. Literally posted not that long ago. And like I mentioned, Danelle Dixon basically shared it. Stellar reposted it. What is this all about? Well, as you can see, there's some key things. Number one, it's a showcase over at Draper University. It happened last week. And according to Danelle, it was exciting to see so many strong pitches and real world blockchain applications. Great partnership, of course, with her friend Tim Draper, right? And, I'll play 6 seconds of this. I mean, it's just a short clip. Listen to this. Hey, thank you, everybody. I mean, how many times have we pointed out the significance of seeing some of these little tastes, if you will, about Stellar and the significance with Draper? So, wow, what's really, really going on with this? Well, there's some things that I decided to jump more into for you guys that I thought was important. The next thing we're going to jump into is some other key things. And, I got more into it. I said to myself, brilliant people to see here. But more importantly, it was what was also shared a few days ago from the Draper side of things. Here is the posting. You have this, and what does it mention? Well, specifically speaking, 30 teams in 3 weeks, posted on September 13th. Draper University talks about how they just wrapped up the first season of the Stellar Org times Draper University Astro Hacker House. Here are the first 10 to 30 teams, basically speaking. Why is it important? Well, it's the whole point of this concept of creating a decentralized cloud storage network, of course, with this particular outfit, which is Aptero. And they have, of course, a metaverse focus, but they also provide tools for businesses and apparently even schools, right, for the educational side of things, which is really neat. A little bit more about this. There's Astroverse. 60 billion garments of clothing go unsold each year. It's a $500 billion problem because of inventory oversupply. And it says Astra is building a marketplace that creates hyper customized clothes, of course, at scale. So many different projects, right, that you see here. But understand that there are so many key ones, and especially when you see more about Africa. So a lot of focus on Africa. And again, I thought I would share this with you guys because clearly you see, the San Francisco Bay Area. You see, for example, that Draper really stands out when it comes to this in Silicon Valley. But again, don't ever forget it. It's the connections when it comes to the likes of Stellar. How so? Well, some of you guys may have never seen some of these things. And that's why I want to share it with you guys. So at the Stellar core, it's what it's connected to, part of that universal software, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, right? But again, when you see some of the connections of a Horizon API or the bridges between some of these other apps, you will have a bigger understanding that when we talk about bridge assets, well, it means just that. And it means what it's connected to. So, far right of the screen, you see, for example, Shopify, you see Stellar Pay, and you can see how all of this is plugged into a much bigger ecosystem that people simply don't realize. But more importantly, how we reach things like consensus, right? So, as I get more into it, other people have been sharing this on X. I think it's great visuals. Sometimes people just need to see it, once again. But you even see Stellar connecting to things like Stronghold, right? SHX. But again, don't ever forget the whole thing of one of the best partnerships that they have, and that is IBM through WorldWire Gateway. As we know, IBM Payment Network is on, of course, the Stellar blockchain. But you see numerous examples of, again, Hyperledger Fabric, and again, understanding how Stellar has, for example, this whole new rollout that's not fully rolled out, but Stellar Sorbonne, right? That key towards smart contracts. Okay. So many tools. We understand quant part of the mix, especially when it comes to Overledger connecting, those networks through the quant Overledger gateway. But there's so many things, again, connected to this bigger picture, the ecosystem, and reaching some of these specific things, whether it's capital market ecosystems or, some of these other things that they're looking to solve, even with the likes of Draper. And so some things caught my eye. And, one of the things that always gets brought up every now and then is like Flutterwave. And I'll show you an example here in a bit. But again, it's Stellar with cross-border transactions, of course, between currencies. But what currencies? Is it world economies? Is it countries, local currencies? It's a combination of both, right? So as you get more into it, understand that Stellar is part of a bigger picture because a lot of people consider a commodity. It has to be backed by something. Is that really a true statement? Some people feel that that it is, and some people feel that it isn't. Where are you on that stance? But when we talk about backed digital assets, of course, XRP stands out. Some people say it's backed by gold, especially with the whole thing with BRICS. But one thing that always gets brought up is Stellar when it comes to silver. And I'm not going to harp long on that tonight. But again, I could understand how this is all connected to a bigger ecosystem. And what ecosystem would that be? Well, this whole concept of a fiat monetary system being connected to what is referred to as the GCR, the global currency reset. Oh no, the great reset. So you can see how Stellar obviously connects to some of these other things. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have studied like, Nassar Gassara and some of these other things as far as the quantum financial system, on and on. But when I got more into the weeds of this, it led me back to this, and that is the Interledger Protocol family and, of course, ISO 222 ecosystem. Don't ever forget about this ecosystem because there's some big names part of this ecosystem. Just like I mentioned before, IBM, Stellar, all part of that Hyperledger fabric. But then you start seeing how it connects to other things like R3 and how R3, obviously, you're not going to see it on this chart, but R3 Corda, XDC bridge, R3 with Corda for quant, R3 with other things, right? But Zinfin's part of the mix. Algorand. I don't talk about Algorand enough, but I'm very bullish on that. So again, an ecosystem and how everything talks to one another through this Interledger protocol family. But more importantly, when we talk about BRICS, understand there's a bigger picture here. And how do we tie in the whole thing of Draper? Well, look what it says here. StartupBRICS. Remember how I said, guys, look out for this whole thing of the bigger picture for Stellar. And when it comes to the whole thing of, the African countries. Because for one, were you aware that there is a project called Draper Darkflow? And a while back, a few years ago, it was a newly made venture capital fund that invests, of course, in African startups. More importantly, it's understanding that Draper Flow was the new VC at the time, and it was a fund backed, of course, by the one and only Tim Draper. And here's the quote that really caught my eye. African startups, you are officially free to go nuts. The more nuts you are, the better Draper Dark Flow will fund you. The tone is set. For starters, Draper Dark Flow is a new early venture capital fund that invests in African entrepreneurs who can change the world. And of course, like it says, launched in Silicon Valley by Tim Draper. But the point is, they invest between 100,000 to 200,000 in startups with initial traction. Let's get more into this. You're going to see how that's small time potatoes. But more importantly, is what Draper University, or Draper VC, I should say, is part of as far as the bigger picture. Do they realize something that we simply don't know? Well, my thing is the answer is definitely yes. It's tapping into some of these things when it especially mentions things like to think globally from the get-go and how you have to get radical about that. And I thought to myself, radical? Okay, well, if we're talking about BRICS nations, that sounds pretty radical. And the next part I thought I would get into is this particular newspaper, if you will. And it's a clipping from 2017. I'm telling you flat out, you want to see this because it says here in this column about a thing called the Digital Investment in Africa and the acceleration program for that. Right here, it mentions, excuse me, telecoms and technology companies are increasing investments across Africa as the rapidly improving digital infrastructure and services, and the uptake of smartphones provide huge opportunities for business and revenue growth. Again, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to play it here in a second. You're going to see why this is so important. Because how many times do I talk about, for example, the Finternet? Augustine Carson's talking about that concept of offline CBDCs. And, Stellar wants to tap into the whole thing of providing services to the underprivileged and to the unbanked, but more specifically, a lot of African countries. But what about, for example, one specific African country that is the S in BRICS? Yeah, you know where I'm going with that. Yeah, South Africa. So some things caught my eye, and I'll show you the citation here in a second because it gets kind of interesting, because what you see right here is a highlight of Draper Dark Flow. Plain as day on the highlight. Why is that important? Well, keep in mind, it's the infrastructure side of things. And especially when it comes to all these ones dating back to 3G. We're in 5G now, right? So at that time, 3G to 4G. But mobile tower operators, again, understanding that telecommunications has ties big time when it comes to even the banking industry. How so? Well, you see, for example, the officers, the investment bankers, and how they all met up at this conference, basically, called TMT Finance in Africa back in 2017 at the Hilton Hotel Tower Bridge. But again, when you see all the participants, who's listed, big names are listed. For example, Citi. You have, for example, obviously Microsoft, Google, but more importantly, Draper Dark Flow. That caught my attention. And if anything, that should catch your attention too. But if you're new to this, understand this. Stellar, a few years ago, put out a specific commercial. Why am I sharing it with you? Well, you let me know. If you've never seen this commercial, you need to see it. We're going to play it, we're going to come back, and we're going to tie everything into the bigger picture of Stellar that you may not have ever been aware of. We'll be right back. Here we go.
The world is full of tensions, all simultaneously pulling on the fabric of our financial system.
Hola, Ma. ¿Todo bien? ¿Qué pasa? Mira, estoy acá afuera del banco, del cajero electrónico. Ah, pero está cerrado. ¡Qué porquería! ¡Qué porquería! ¿Pero qué están haciendo? Déjenme pasar, que necesito sacar dinero.
L'avertissement intervient après que plusieurs rapports ont fait surface sur des voyageurs qui se font voler de force leur argent à des barrages.
That is exactly where we see change peering through. Change that is powered by those who have the skills to create it. Change that includes the unincluded. A change that enables all the financial world has to offer to anyone, anywhere. Driven by technology that helps people to truly own what is theirs.
De l'argent pour mon téléphone, s'il te plaît.
Combien?
Le tout.
We are the bridge builders, connecting those who seek opportunities to those who dare to
Les
create them.
réfugiés n'ont pas de smartphone, on est d'accord. Ah, on les imprime plutôt sur ces téléphones. Vous en pensez quoi?
Our calling is to create tools for doing good by doing well,
Ma, no te preocupes, yo te mando plata.
and doing well by doing good.
Ah, gracias, hija.
Mais sont entrés dans le camp avec l'intention de délivrer, d'intimider et de voler de l'argent, en prenant les dernières épargnes de ceux qui ont plus besoin.
And bridge technical and physical borders with technology for real-world problems. Look, see the opportunities. We just need a way to bridge the obstacles, to create a more just world by acknowledging that everyone is valuable and empower local solutions to solve local problems. The Stellar Network, a universe of opportunity.
All right, welcome back. So, very interesting video. I think it pounds home with some of these specific things, smartphones, and let's face it, Stellar has technology to even, allow people that don't even have smartphones or still on the old systems of the flip phones to still have access. Again, if you're going to make the claim of banking the unbanked, it's also the ones that don't have access to all the great stuff that we have access to. Absolutely. So let's jump into the next part, why it's important. Again, I'm going to take you over to some of these key things. So here is the next part in the outline. And man, I think it was a good find for the most part. So I'm going to take you to this. This is a PDF called Trade Liberation with BRICS. It's a CG model of Egypt. Now, of course, you may be wondering, like, Egypt. I thought you just went from South Africa. Why all of a sudden go into Egypt? Again, it's trade liberalization with BRICS. Okay, so the S in BRICS is part of, obviously, the BRICS nations, and there's other member states. Watch this for a second. This gets really interesting, in my opinion. So, for one, this is published by the American University in Cairo, and this is this year. But more importantly, as I take you down into some of the key areas, you will see what really matters that caught my eye. And that is this thing called SAM and the whole thing of Nexus as a standard. It separates activities from commodities to treat the commodity accounts as markets through which payment flows in from demanders such as households, enterprises, intermediate demand from producers, government, and non-domestic importers of domestic output. From these markets, payments also flow out to producers of final goods, trade services, transaction costs, so on and so forth. But more importantly, as you get more further into the outline, you will see that when you take into mind all the other ones that apply, for example, commodities in the form of sales tax and tariffs on imports, you will see that they have payments from all these specific sectors that require trade services such as moving commodities from domestic producers, of course, to domestic buyers. And some people say, well, this is where, XDC would really stand out. But I thought I saw something that really reminded me of something from the past. And as I got more into it, I said to myself, Nexus, that sounds really familiar. I could have read something about that from a few years ago. And I'm sure some of you guys remember where I'm going with this. So, how many times do you see references in regards to payments? But more importantly, how many times do you see examples here literally posted in this document from earlier this year about, for instance, investments by sector of origin, and more importantly, capturing payments made to sectors whose commodities are used to build physical capital. Again, back to the Larry Fink reference from BlackRock. Physical capital. We are also talking about Draper. Draper understands that you need enablers to raise a bunch of capital, but more importantly, they want to be on the next wave of taking things to this concept of Web3, but more importantly, they want to be part of the bigger mix. It's plain as day. It's literally, you have it written on the wall. You see Tim Draper with Danelle Dixon. So when we see examples of this, that there's a tremendous demand for commodities to be used for investment, again, I understand that, wow, there has to be something bigger here. And that, of course, takes me to this, because I did mention Nexus. And again, this is from a BRICS document. This gets really interesting. So as I went further into my own deep dive with you guys, and I do appreciate all those who are still listening, Stellar. Did we forget about this? Maybe you never were aware of it because you're new to Stellar, but they had a press release. This dates back to 2021 of the expansion of USDC on Stellar and how it continued with like the shift of markets. But Nexus, guys, markets integration. There's a bigger picture here, and I think Draper fulfills that bigger picture, especially when it comes to the collaboration with Stellar. As I get into more of the weeds about this, you will see, especially from this old publication, I think originally it was 2021 they had the partnership, and then they updated this in 2022. But again, understand San Francisco, right? So Nexus Markets, we're of course thrilled to be part of Stellar's new integration for institutional retail clients, but more importantly, understanding that it's the concept of USDC with it, and also understanding that Nexus has this thing called vaults. They will be using USDC and, of course, Stellar-based stablecoins, which is basically USDC, let's face it, to be available on the Nexus vault. Their clients will have the opportunity to earn annual percentage yield, of course, on their assets. What kind of assets? Physical-based assets. And again, reference back to what you saw from the BRICS publication. With this integration, at least back then, Shift Markets and Nexus Markets introduces clients to the speed and low cost of Stellar-based stablecoins. So, again, where are we going with this? But more importantly, where does Nexus tie into it? And again, is there a bigger thing going on in the background? Well, some people say to me, I'm always focused on the specific stuff. But again, I feel as though that if you're going to see de-dollarization or the BRICS companies do a radical shift, why wouldn't you want to pay attention to what they're going to do? And more importantly, why wouldn't you want to pay attention to the ones tied into BRICS, whether it's Stellar, whether it's, Ripple XRP and so on? So I think that's worth pointing out. And as I got more into it and what I'm sharing with you guys, keep in mind that this, at least a couple years ago, introduced clients to speed and low cost of Stellar-based stablecoins, but the point was to utilize and manage them in an efficient, cost-effective way. More so on this, it was the exchange of solutions for the global clientele. Think about this, and its technology service provider arm. So that arm, when we talk about some of these things, understand it's all about adding more liquidity. How so? Nexus has their own markets. And like it also mentions, this marks an expansion of Nexus with this thing called Shift Markets. But again, it's the reach. Again, reaching the unbanked, as the saying goes. So Stellar comes into the play. Stellar also has this whole thing of USDC, even with Brazil. Brazil is obviously the B in BRICS. But again, understanding that this is something that really, really exists, but more importantly, it's understanding that Stellar-based assets, like it says here, will continue to propel and shift Nexus further into the crypto ecosystem to connect more assets, unique liquidity for our institutional and retail clients. But more importantly, what about your BRICS clients? Think about that for a second. I think that speaks volumes about this bigger picture. Now, back to the whole topic of, for example, Draper and also, of course, Stellar, because we saw a lot of repostings, but sometimes we never saw anything that really, I don't know, says specifically Stellar and Draper. Well, here is the proof finally in the pudding. If you go to draperuniversity.com/Stellar, plain as day, you see that Draper is investing a total of over 1 million USD into Web3 companies building, of course, on the Stellar network. Don't get tunnel vision on the 1 million USD, and I'll show you why here in the bit. But the point is this, everybody, their programs are incentives, right? And again, Silicon Valley, it's providing all this extra capital, but more importantly, understanding that this extra capital could lead towards a huge ecosystem opportunity, of course, for Stellar. But what's next? Well, like it says here, what's next is these deadlines. So for one, on the Stellar side of things, there's a deadline about September 20th coming up in a few days. There's going to be a selection process on October 5th, and they're going to kick some of this stuff off on November 4th. Now, of course, we're not building projects because we're just people that are investors, but thought I would point that out to you guys. As I get more into this, back to the whole thing about Draper and this thing called Dark Flow, kind of sounds spooky, but it's not meant to be that way. So Draper Dark Flow definitely does have a mission. They're a Silicon Valley venture capital fund investing in African startups that can change the world. Again, this is all adding up in my eyes. And as I give you another particular example, this comes from cbinsights.com on the citation. Why is this important? Well, it's the investments, right? So back to the whole thing of Dark Flow from Draper Dark Flow is Tim Draper, him specifically, his Silicon Valley based VC fund. And as I got more into the whole thing of this, I saw some real key things that kind of stood out. And I thought I would again show you a little bit more about this, because as I went to darkflow.vc to find more information, well, it doesn't exist anymore. And I thought, why all of a sudden does this not exist anymore? I mean, it's not like it went kaput. So I decided to go back to the Wayback Time Machine. And as you guys know, this is something I do. But again, look what it says. We back awesome African startups that can change the world, and we can help them, become epic, as some of the kids would say, right? But changing the world, a Silicon Valley-based VC fund for African startups that can change the world. Again, think about where Stellar is positioned in the world. Think about, for example, where, VCs are, but more importantly, specifically, I should say, Draper. So early stage, they have backing. But again, look at this, mobile. Look at this. We love mobile, and we hope you do too. And when I got more into this, I said, oh, they're going to, reveal what their secret sauce is to make this happen. Well, I clicked on that. I couldn't get the timestamp for that, unfortunately. It leads to a broken link. But again, is Dark Flow through Draper their quote-unquote secret sauce for who? Africa. That's where it's at. And again, investment philosophy. On average, the age of 20 has, according to them, exploding talent and startup growth. Do the math. Well, I'm not going to get into all that, but when you see statements here about Africa as a sub-Saharan second fastest growing economic region in the world, they recognize the opportunities. It's not just Stellar. It's not just the Bank of International Settlements. It's not just, for example, Draper, but it's all of these coming together for this bigger picture. And if you want to know a little bit more about this and why I'm pointing out some of these key things, keep in mind, Draper Darkflow, their industry focus is on apps and mobile. Stellar's industry focus clearly is on the unbanked and the underprivileged. So they go together like what? Peas and carrots. Headquartered in San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley. And as you can see right now, it says, for example, close. But I thought to myself, okay, you may feel as though this is a nothing bird, but really it isn't, because you have to keep in mind, is this just another version of, a vision that was unfulfilled? And if so, does it make sense that now you're seeing some of this being fulfilled by the collaboration with Stellar? I think that's the answer. I absolutely think is the answer, because when we go back to it from Crunchbase, you will see that Draper Darkflow is Africa's most epic startup accelerator for entrepreneurs in emerging markets with mobile-focused global ideas. Definitely worth pointing out. And look at the list of featured companies. They have closed California mobile companies that had 11.1 billion total funding. That's a lot, by the way. And you see some other examples, literally from here. Again, billions of dollars, but all funneling through the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically Silicon Valley. All right. So I brought up the whole thing of, for example, ecosystems and so on. And then again, this is another one that really caught my eye, because on this medium, what do you see? Dating back to 2017, African startups are increasingly attractive to investors. But more importantly, like, do we have examples other than what you recently saw with Draper of maybe things that, were posted years ago for disruption, as the saying goes? Well, yeah, you do, because again, back to Flutterwave, and we understand that they're a partner with Stellar, but again, Flutterwave is an API-driven fintech platform. They raised, at least back then, 10 million plus in a Series A round, and of course, they have connections to Silicon Valley. So again, every single time we try to put this together, back to those references of Silicon Valley. And again, Y Combinator. Remember, if you've seen that deep dive, Y Combinator was the culprit to really get things going for some big names out there. And Y Combinator and Draper, Y Combinator with Coinbase, for crying out loud, all of this simply adds up, at least in my eyes. As I take a little bit more into some of this, I want you to see this other thing, because again, some people just, I guess, don't see it. But again, Flutterwave is doing what? They are doing work in a region that has been historically underserved. And again, Stellar Development Foundation wants to be able to create a thing where you have financial access and inclusion. Again, not just in Africa, but beyond there. And look what it also mentions. Again, the APIs. Again, understanding Flutterwave, like it says, has processed, and again, I don't know if people understand how significant this is, over 140 million transactions worth over 9 billion to date, and serves more than 290,000 businesses, including customers like Uber, Flywire, Booking.com, and Facebook. Now, why is this important? Let me come into the frame for a second. Because understanding that Stellar, when they take their time to build this whole thing of this premier smart contract platform, I know I keep talking about it till I'm blue in the face, of Sorbonne, understand the plug and the connect. That's why I show you visualizations. It will allow smart contract functionality to these bigger players. And that is absolutely huge, because when we talk about the tokenization of all that, again, that's where Ethereum in many years ago really shined. Again, understanding that Vitalik Buterin took that concept of, hey, guess what? We can make smart contracts outside of Bitcoin. Okay. But again, what's the problem with Ethereum? It's that old, outdated tech. And I understand there's, like, for example, roll-ups even with Ethereum, layer 2s and whatnot. But again, for Stellar, what stands out for all of you guys? It's the cost. It is so significantly cheaper to build on Stellar. And if anything, it's a lot faster technology, and keeping it where, everybody? On its own layer. As we know, Stellar is a layer 1. So you can see the significance of understanding why we recognize Stellar, but more importantly, their connections. They've been building for years. I should say everybody, there's a good amount of people that will flood this and say, price don't move much, price don't move much, price don't move at all, it's garbage. They have never been to the stage of mass adoption. And again, back to the reference from Danelle Dixon, she was talking specifically about how people like misinterpreted some of the things that she has to say. And I'll show you an example of that later on, not in this particular deep dive. So that's something I definitely wanted to point out. The other thing I want to jump into is this here in a bit, but we're going to take a pause. And that is basically this. A lot of talk about Draper, right? More importantly, understand the bigger picture. What is Tim Draper's bigger picture? What is he mainly connected to? And more importantly, check out what does he have to say in this particular somewhat recent blockchain conference that he was a guest speaker on. And if anything, let me know your takeaway from it, because again, I feel as though that the Drapers do not want to bet on anything that is a sinking ship or anything that fails. They want to embrace innovation, obviously because of their connections, and they've done it for many, many years. They're betting on a winning horse, and it's definitely Stellar. Let's jump into that video. We'll come right back. We'll wrap this all up and show you some other key things that is important in regards to the research. Smash the like if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Here we go.
Yeah, we've seen an interesting trend in like the past year where sometimes it almost feels like Wall Street is co-opting crypto, right? Now, if you're lazy and you don't want to learn, you can just buy a Bitcoin ETF, and there are a lot of hedge funds getting into this space. I mean, does that disappoint you that maybe crypto is just going to be part of the mainstream financial industry?
If you don't want to learn, I'm thinking, if you can plug in a color TV, you can buy Bitcoin. It's not that hard. You can put Bitcoin on a ledger, and they're making it easier. So, when people say, I don't understand it, I think they're not really, I think it's denial. Look, it's better, easier. Decentralization is magic. It's fantastic that we don't have in the U.S. we got this central bank, and that central bank is keeps printing currency for the politicians, and when they print that currency, we suffer because our dollars get to be worth less. Centralization relies on a single entity. That's why I'm a Bitcoiner, and I like some of the other currencies, the Tezos and some of the others, because they're decentralized. But a lot of these currencies are very centralized, and I'm not a big fan because it's the same thing. Now, at least they're digital. And people ask me about, the digital dollar. Let me clue you in. The digital dollar will go the same way as the dollar does. So keep that in mind. Good. Let's talk about something else.
Like, other than crypto, or?
No, yeah, go ahead. It's your job. Do your thing.
I mean, from a venture capital perspective, what are the most exciting use cases in the crypto world that you do want to put your money in right now?
Well, what's really great is that Bitcoin's making it easier and easier for the consumer to buy, hold, spend, invest. And once the entire financial system can be replicated, it will all move over. So that's what I was thinking. That's what I was kind of getting to. And in venture capital, you've got this great opportunity to invest in those companies that are, Bitcoin's a little like Microsoft was in the internet times, or in the software times. Microsoft created a platform. There was this platform. They said, oh, go ahead, experiment on the platform. And then somebody created a spreadsheet, and Microsoft watched as Lotus 1, 2, 3 became this big deal. And then then they watched as WordPerfect became a really big deal, word processing. And so Microsoft said, well, we're going to be an operating system, and then we're going to have Excel and Word, and we're going to replace these two. But otherwise, you guys continue to develop interesting things on the platform. I think the same thing's happening now in crypto. In Bitcoin, Bitcoin created this platform. A lot of other currencies, Ethereum and others, created a platform that was easier to program to. And so all the experiments have been happening. And there have been all sorts of little weird, strange things that have happened on those platforms. But we now know what the important ones were. NFTs. Now we have ordinals on Bitcoin. Smart contracts. Now smart contracts are being ported over to Bitcoin. A number of, so there are, I don't know, maybe 4 base ETFs or you know, any financial systems for whatever, they're all being ported to Bitcoin. That's a venture opportunity because the changes are happening. And so I'm excited about that. There are point token companies that are very interesting where there's a real use and a real need for them. I don't buy and sell tokens, but I invest in entrepreneurs. Those entrepreneurs go off and build big businesses. Sometimes they issue tokens. I make sure that when they issue those tokens that there's a real reason for those tokens to exist in the long-term future. Yeah, I mean, the other things we look for at Draper are so it's anything decentralized. So anything decentralized would be a way of using AI for medicine, a way of using DAOs for new forms of governance, a way of using. So we're doing a lot of investing in a lot of companies that are trying to decentralize the world. And then, of course, you know, there are great markets in space and transportation, and in AI is going to basically transform a whole swath of different industries. And so this is really, I don't think there's been a more exciting time to be a venture capitalist. So really, the more a government sets very clear ground rules, trusts its people, and sets them free. So all these little regulations, they are trouble. So anybody who works in government, no more regulations. Just make very clear laws and let her rip and see what happens. And if somebody starts impinging on other people's worlds, then go ahead and do something. Don't over-anticipate all the horrible things that could happen with AI. Let's go explore AI. Don't worry about all the horrible things that could happen if people are selling drugs with, you know, cryptocurrencies or whatever. Let's just see what happens. Let's let it rip. And if you do that, I mean, I think the global economy could grow at, instead of 1%, it could grow at 8%.
Apologies for the beginning question. I'm a bit of a noob in the industry, but I made my first crypto investments in October. You just mentioned companies that issue tokens, and you would ensure that they issue tokens for good reasons. Do you have an example of a good reason?
Yeah, a lot of them are making it so that it's a more fluid market. It's all for liquidity, of course. The big question I usually have as an investor is there a token that after the initial, you know, hype or whatever, people are going to have a real reason to buy. So that's what it's really got to be. And they're generally, you know, I guess the SEC's define them as utility tokens, but they generally have a real use. Now, that doesn't mean that they will generally be used as a currency. I think currency just has to have broad appeal, and it's got to be recognized by everybody.
Think about what Tim Draper just mentioned there. And with that said, let's take you to the next part, because man, does it get good. Shout out to Black Swan Capitalist, Verson and his brother Vandell. Look what they have here. This is good, because even with this, it's a short clip. Back to the whole thing of what I was talking about. And that is, when we recognize some key things, I want you guys to understand that sometimes, whether it's a deep dive about Stellar, remember how I mentioned the whole thing about that Bank of International Settlements flower? This is a great reference. Lynette Zhang rightfully questions the 1996 NSA white paper on minting digital currency before Bitcoin's inception and explains that the Bank of International Settlements money flower for what? Commodity-backed digital currencies that operate outside the central bank control. You see XRP and XLM tagged here. I will play this. This is good. Listen to this. Only a minute 45 seconds. Here we go.
So, no, I never felt, especially after reading the 1996 NSA white paper on how to make a mint or create a mint, where they were talking about the cryptocurrencies, I just never thought that it was a coincidence that Bitcoin, and I've been watching it since it was $7 a token, right? So that came out in January of 2009, and quantitative easing came out in March of 2009. It's also not a big shocker that it had the first run. Now it's having the second run, because when things run up, it gathers eyes, right? It becomes more normal. Having it adopted into the system is more normal. But I also pay attention to the Bank for International Settlements money flower, because that really tells you what the central bankers, they're the central bankers, what the central banks really think of digital currencies. And if you go on and you look at it, there is a small space that is out of the central bank purview. All the other cryptocurrencies are within their realm, and certainly the CBDCs on both a wholesale and a retail level. There is a larger area for commodity money, which is, gold and silver. Okay. Those are the only areas that are peer-to-peer and outside the central bank's ability to completely control. So which coins actually fit inside of that money flower?
Yeah, think about it. Obviously I did the whole thing about QNT, but again, which ones would fit when it comes to the whole thing of commodities? So, Stellar really meets that criteria. But more importantly, she mentioned she meant specifically CFTC. At least I was on the screen for the citation. So look at this. I want you guys to understand that when we get more into all of this, you can't deny the connections when it comes to things like commodity futures and understanding the difference between like commodities and obviously securities moving forward. And thank God that, it looks like Ripple is never going to be or never going to have to worry moving forward, especially after regulations, of getting that label of security anymore, right? But this is a Stellar video, and I want you guys to understand, again, the concept of what we're talking about when it comes to commodities. So I'm going to jump into this part of the outline. And again, shout out to this guy, Alp. I've referenced him in the past and so on, but he did a good outline here. And he goes on to mention that Stellar Lumens joins super important board as first blockchain project ever worldwide. Think about that for a second, because again, this is a Stellar outline. So he goes into detail about some of these specific things, and he talks about how SDF, which is Stellar Development Foundation, will be joining the Global Market Advisory Committee of the Commodities Futures Commission as its only blockchain representation. And I remember sharing this with some of you guys like maybe a year or two ago, and I think if anything, if you're new, this pounds it home. Because when you see that Stellar Lumens joins super important board as first blockchain project ever worldwide, again, man, I mean, it's just understanding that these connections that they have is definitely worth pointing out, because look what it says. The committee advises on the challenges and opportunities of a global marketplace and includes leading institutions, like some of the ones like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and so on. But if you weren't aware of it, SDF in itself is going to do what? They're going to lend crypto native perspective to the committee and help foster deep collaborations between TradeFi and blockchain sectors. Or how about deep collaborations between VCs, hence the Draper connection. As I get more into this, I want you to see this as well. This is from CFTC.gov. And what's important is in the United States, like it says, they are home to the world's first $1 trillion public company. Obviously, that would be Apple, born out of Silicon Valley. Look how this is aging. And now all 5 public companies with a market cap of over $1 trillion are still in the United States tech companies. But this person is concerned that we have taken our past progress for granted, and they're waiting to see approach in the United States towards the potential opportunities of blockchain tech and digital assets. So are we going to see this be a rapidly evolving industry? I think so, but more importantly, it's back to some of these references, because when I got more into it, I said to myself, yeah, we need to see regulatory compliance. We need to see proper regulations, and we need to see what was birthed out of that. And here's the reference. New regulatory sandbox proposal for CFTC pilot, at least back then. Remarks of Commissioner Caroline D. Pham before the Cato Institute, staying ahead of the curve, crypto regulation competitiveness. Right. Is this finally going to get done? Everybody's asking about that. Well, I think we will see it get done. It's just a matter of time, because when you look more into it, back to this reference, it's understanding that the CFTC and SEC have in the past had successful launching pilot programs, but at the core, these programs provide a way to strategically introduce new initiatives. Who's part of these new initiatives? I mean, Stellar stands out in that regard. So again, back to the whole thing of the United States participating in some of this, and more importantly, understanding how there was a vision that even dates back to 1995 about it all. Does this pound home what you saw in that interview from Black Swan Capitalists? I think so, because again, referencing the whole thing of the NSA. All right, to close it out, I want to share with you this. This is from dailycoin.com. Stellar joins, of course, an initiative to support vulnerable communities. If this doesn't pound home everything, I don't know what will. Because, again, they have this whole thing of scope, the collaboration of who or what. Again, to improve financial infrastructure to the underserved communities. I mean, this all makes sense. The initiative aims to mobilize $10 billion in what? Private capital. Does this not come back to everything with Draper? And it says by 2030 to empower 1,000 businesses to scale in frontier markets. Is it a collaboration? Does it say that? Yes. It's between humanitarian organizations, investors, there's your Draper plug, governments, and companies to develop market-based solutions, of course, to a global crisis. But, let's face it, a lot of focus in Africa. So those examples I gave to you guys today, I hope, if anything, you understand the bigger picture of it, especially when it comes to Stellar moving forward. But my key takeaway is this. When we look at Stellar and look at all those repostings of many, like almost like a year now, right? Shout out to Rue and some of his findings, especially Underdog and their findings, especially when it comes to Swift, Swift blockchain, Swift coin, and so on. But understand that, man, oh man, everything is aging well. It's almost like getting your ducks in a row. And then you reference things of the past, and then you reference things from what's going on with BRICS. And it's just like, yeah, there is something to be said about all of this. I'm not a fan of the BRICS nations, and I don't want to see the dollar de-dollarize. But if we talk about being prepared right? Like some people invest in precious metals. You're preparing yourself for a radical thing that could happen. So, with that also said, we have to recognize what's going on with the BRICS nations, because if doom and gloom happens, well, do you have particular assets, whether it's Stellar XLM and some of these other ones, they're going to play, I guess you could say, both sides of the fence, because we talk about what? Decentralization. That's the point, and that's always been the point moving forward. So, with that said, just do me a favor. You know the drill. If you listen to the outline, simply do me a favor and type into the comments this keyword, Draper, and I'll know that you listened to the entire outline. I always appreciate you guys listening to these deep dives. Know what you have, know why you hold it. The research trumps FUD 110%. We'll see you on the next one. If managing your crypto feels like solving a puzzle, it's time to switch to Decent Wallet. Say goodbye to complicated setups and hello to Decent Wallet, the hassle-free solution to your digital currency needs. With just a few taps, you can manage, track, and secure your crypto with unmatched ease. And here's the best part. Grab your Decent Wallet at a discounted price by using the referral link below. Don't miss out on making your crypto experience smoother and more secure.